They told us to stay inside. We should not have listened. The weekend it all began. I was completely disconnected. I decided to stay home, away from my phone, social media, everything. Just me, the couch, hot coffee, and the sound of soft rain against the window. Red Pine Falls was always like that on weekends, quiet, a bit forgotten, moving at its usual slow pace. I lived in an old apartment building, the kind that felt stuck in time. My neighbors were easygoing folks. The lady in 104 walked her dog every morning. The kid from B13 was always skateboarding in the parking lot. A couple down the street would fight loudly, but always made up the next day. It was Sunday when I saw the alert. I didn't hear a sound. I just noticed a shift in the living room light, like something had flickered. I looked at the TV, which was off, and it had turned on by itself. The screen displayed a red background with static white letters. Emergency alert, do not leave your home, remain disconnected, avoid windows, await instructions. I grabbed my cell phone by reflex. It showed the exact same message, same color, same font. No sound, no sirens, no explanation, just that text. My first reaction was to laugh. It seemed like a system error. Maybe a poorly programmed test. The government often runs simulations, right? Especially in small towns like ours. But when I tried to change the channel, the TV froze. The power button didn't work. My phone also froze. The screen flickered, then went back to the alert. I restarted it, but the same warning reappeared, as if it were imprinted on the system itself. I looked out the window, expecting to see some movement, some collective response. But everything was the same. A few lights on in the surrounding buildings, but no one on the street. Not even the sound of the lady calling her dog, or the skateboarder, or the couple arguing. Just a thick silence, as if the world was holding its breath. I went back to the couch, phone still in hand. I tried to open any app, but nothing worked. Everything was frozen. I turned on the old radio on the shelf. As soon as it powered up, the announcer's voice was interrupted, and the same alert phrase began to repeat, like a soft, emotionless mantra. Do not leave your home, remain disconnected, avoid windows. I switched it off immediately. From that moment on, everything in me wanted to say it was just a technical glitch, a coincidence. But something was wrong, very wrong. The next morning, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not a common silence, it was something heavier, as if sound had been drained from the town. Even the birds weren't singing. I got up slowly, opened the window, and looked outside. The sky was cloudy, but no sign of rain. The streets were clean. The houses exactly as they always were, but no one in sight. No cars, no doors opening, no footsteps on the pavement. It seemed like everyone had simply vanished or decided, at the same time, to stay home. Even the lady from 104's dog wasn't barking anymore. The strangest thing was that the lights in most houses were still on, even in the morning. As if people were still inside, just motionless. I watched for a few minutes, waiting for some movement. When I noticed a curtain moving in the apartment across the way, I felt a surge of relief, but the relief was short-lived. The curtain moved with exaggerated slowness, as if being pulled by someone who wasn't quite sure what they were doing. And then, through the glass, I saw a face. It was Mr. Larkin, from 202. He was just staring blankly at the sky, unblinking, expressionless. The curtain slowly dropped back down, and the window was closed. I went back inside and tried to make a call. I called my sister, then my friend Mark, and then the city's main line. All the numbers rang, but none answered, until one call connected. My sister's name appeared on the cell phone screen. I answered immediately. Hello, silence. Then a voice emerged, but it wasn't hers. It was low, soft, strangely calm. Everything's fine now. Stay home. Await instructions. I hung up immediately. I don't know why it scared me so much. It wasn't a threat, it was the tone, to calm, to controlled, as if someone had been trained to soothe me. But I wasn't calm, and something told me I shouldn't be. Shortly after, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. It was the teenager from B13, the skateboard kid, but he didn't have his skateboard. With him, he just walked slowly down the hall, looking at each door. He reached mine, paused for a few seconds, and then whispered something too low for me to understand. Then he continued walking to the end of the hall and disappeared down the stairs. I opened the door slightly and called out to him, but he didn't respond. He didn't even turn his head. That night was even stranger. The streetlights flickered, like a bulb about to burn out. In a moment of nervousness, I yelled out the window, asking if anyone knew what was happening. No answer, but, in the distance, I heard the sound of a door opening. And then another. Suddenly, all over the block, several doors slowly began to open. People emerged from their homes, but they didn't speak, they didn't interact. They just walked silently into the street, looking up at nothing, as if they were waiting for something to fall from the sky. There was Mr. Larkin, standing in the middle of the street, still with that empty expression. The lady from 104 was beside him, with her dog, which was now lying motionless, eyes open. The teenager was there too. No one moved anymore. I stood there, watching, my heart pounding. And then, as if they'd received an invisible command, they all went back inside at the same time. I closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and sat on the kitchen floor. Something was happening, and it wasn't just a simple alert. No one seemed scared, and that's what bothered me the most. It was as if they had accepted a new rule, a new logic. And I was the only one who still hadn't figured out what it was. I woke up the next day with a strange feeling in my body. It wasn't pain or tiredness, but a kind of weight on my shoulders, as if the air was denser, the ceiling seemed lower. The silence was no longer strange, it was the new normal. I got out of bed with difficulty, drank some coffee that tasted like paper, and went to the door. When I tried to turn the doorknob, it wouldn't budge. I tried again, harder, nothing. It was locked from the outside. This made no sense. There was no lock on the outside of the door. At least, not that I knew of. I pushed, banged, forced. Nothing gave way. I went to the living room window and tried to open it, but I noticed the glass was different. It didn't reflect properly. It was as if a film had been glued to the outside. I grabbed a hammer from the cabinet and hit it hard. The glass cracked, then broke, and a cold wind rushed through the opening. But the air, it had a strange smell. It wasn't pollution or mold. It was sweet, almost perfumed, but artificial. A smell that made everything seem to clean, as if the world had been forcibly sanitized. I looked out through the cracks and saw the mailman. He walked slowly, with regular steps, carrying nothing in his hands. He passed the mailboxes, but didn't put anything in any of them. He just walked to the end of the street and stopped. He stood there, looking at nothing. I kept watching until he turned and came back the same way, at the same pace. As he passed my window, he looked directly at me, not with surprise or shock. He just stared as if I were the strange one in this story. I closed the window and went to the kitchen. I turned on the microwave to heat up some food, but the panel showed something strange. Instead of numbers or functions, the same alert message appeared. The words were repeating, "Remain at home. Await instructions. Everything's fine now." I turned the appliance off immediately. I looked around. The TV was off, but flickering, as if trying to turn on. My laptop no longer powered up. The radio played static, with small whispers I couldn't identify. I went to the door again, the doorknob still locked. I began to wonder if someone had done that during the night, but who and why? I grabbed a kitchen knife, not for protection, but because the idea of being trapped in my own home really started to weigh on me. Not because of the lack of freedom itself, but because of the absence of any explanation. Later, I heard noises in the hallway, slow footsteps, someone whispering. I approached the door and listened intently. The voice repeated, almost like a child learning a new phrase, "Everything's fine now. You're safe." I went to the peephole. It was the woman from 103. She was going from door to door, pressing her forehead against the wood and saying those words softly. Then she would smile and continue. Her face seemed to serene, as if she had achieved some forced peace. When she reached my door, she did the same, said the words, pressed her head, and stayed there for a minute, quiet, until she left. I stood motionless for a long time. When I finally managed to get off the floor, I noticed something even more unsettling. All the mirrors in the house, in the bathroom, the living room, and even on the back of the closet door, were fogged up. No windows had condensation. Here was no steam, but the mirrors looked like they had been touched. And in the center of each, there was a mark. As if someone had written a single phrase with their finger, "Stay home." It was as if the message was trying to get inside me in every possible way, through the screen, through the sound, through the smell, now even through reflection. I didn't sleep that night. The world outside seemed mute. And inside me, something was starting to stir. It wasn't exactly fear, it was doubt, as if a part of my mind was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, they were right, and that I really should just stay home. I was starting to lose track of time. Hours no longer passed as before. The sky maintained that grayish hue, neither night nor day, as if the world had been put on standby. Food was running out, the refrigerator light flickered, as if even the electricity was afraid to stay on. I no longer received new alerts, but the original message kept flashing on all the devices that still worked. Even the ones that were off, it had become a kind of ghost. On the fourth night, I heard knocking on the kitchen window. 3 dry taps, then silence. I couldn't see anyone outside. Through the crack, I could only see the tall weeds of the community garden and the motionless outline of an abandoned car. But there was something about that knocking. It wasn't random. It was human, measured, as if it was being used to get my attention, not to scare me. The next morning, a sheet of paper was pushed under my door. It was a handwritten letter with shaky letters. It said, "If you still think for yourself, come down to the basement of Block C. Bring paper." No devices. It was signed only with a name, Clark. I thought of 1,000 ways this could be a trap. But in the end, the idea of staying there, trapped and alone, was worse. I exited through the laundry room window, which was in the back and still had a simple latch. I walked through the back of the buildings, keeping my head down. The silence followed me, but it was an oppressive silence, full of invisible eyes. I saw some people through the windows, empty faces, all looking inside their own homes, as if they had given up on the world. I reached Block C, where the basement was partially open, with a rock propping the door. I went down the stairs cautiously, and there, in the dark, I found Clark. A thin man, unshaven, wearing an old military coat and holding a flashlight. He didn't look dangerous, but he didn't look calm either. He led me to a corner of the basement, where 3 others were sitting on the floor with pads of paper, writing. Clark spoke softly, as if even the walls there could hear. "You saw the alert, right? Yes. Then you're already compromised, but maybe there's still time." I asked what he meant by compromised, and that's when he explained everything. The alert we received wasn't a warning message, it wasn't meant to protect us. It was the beginning, the entry, the vector. They designed the alert to seem safe, cold, direct, clean. But it was designed to fix itself in the mind. Repetition, color, tone, it wasn't sent to inform. It was sent to condition. He showed me a portable radio that had been disassembled. The wires were black, as if burned. Every device that receives the signal is corroded, but not physically. The corrosion is mental. First you agree to stay home. Then you agree not to look out the window. Then you agree that you don't need to go out anymore. Until the thought of going out doesn't even exist. A woman in the group, with hollow eyes and trembling fingers, said her husband started repeating phrases a week before the alert. She said he had already received the call, and that after that, he just smiled and said everything was better now. Clark showed me hand-drawn images representing signal patterns, spiral waves, truncated texts. These shapes repeat in the visual alerts. They get stuck in the brain like a virus. Most people accept it. Some, like us, resist. But for how long? I remained silent. My stomach churned. The alert, which until then I had treated as a strange warning, was part of the contamination. There were no sirens because the threat wasn't external. It was inside everyone's head, planted there with a phrase and a color. Before leaving, Clark handed me a sheet of paper with notes. There was a hand-drawn map marking the center of town, where an old emergency transmission truck was located. According to him, that's where the signals were coming from. If you can shut that down, maybe there'll be time for the few who still resist. What about you? I asked. I've seen the alert for too long. I returned home by the same route, avoiding the glazed eyes of those peeking through windows. Upon arrival, I closed all the curtains, turned off all remaining appliances, and sat on the floor, looking at the crumpled paper in my hands. For the first time, I felt there was something bigger than just a system error, and that my mind had been molding for days, perhaps from the very first moment I looked at that red screen. But now, I knew, in the following days, I started to notice that something inside me was changing. It wasn't physical, my body was still the same. I still looked at myself in the mirror with that expression of accumulated tiredness. But my thoughts, they began to repeat themselves. I noticed patterns in my own sentences. I would think something and, seconds later, repeat it in a low voice, as if trying to convince myself. Sometimes, I would write something in the notebook Clark gave me, and when I reread it, it felt like it wasn't me who wrote it. The words came too easily. Stay home. Everything's fine now. Avoid windows. I didn't want to think about it, but the thoughts came on their own, like an echo. I started to distrust myself, my own mind, and that's the kind of fear you can't run from. One night, I woke up with the sensation of being watched. The hallway light was on, even though I remembered turning it off. I went there and saw wet footprints on the floor. Small, like bare feet, they went from the front door to the bathroom. I followed slowly, my heart pounding. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror was fogged up, and in the center, someone had written with their finger, "You're almost ready." That night, I didn't go back to sleep. I sat on the bedroom floor with the flashlight on, the kitchen knife beside me, and the notebook open. I forced myself to write something different. I tried to remember my sister's name, the town where I was born, my favorite food. But the more I tried, the emptier everything seemed. The memories were there, but they crumbled in the details, like dreams told too late. It was as if the parts that made me up were being deleted one by one. The next day, I decided to go back to the basement to look for Clark. The door was ajar, as before, but no one was there. The place seemed abandoned for days, even though I knew I had been there a short time ago. On the floor, only a sheet of paper with a red spiral drawing. On the back, a phrase written in red pen, "The more you look, the more it understands you." From then on, I began to question if Clark had even existed, if that group of people was really there. Or if my mind, in an attempt to protect itself, created a fantasy of resistance to keep me functioning. But the map was still with me, the notes too. And the anguish wasn't a product of imagination, that I knew. On the way back, I saw a man standing in front of the building, looking at the sky. He was wearing a delivery uniform, completely dirty. His head was tilted back at a strange angle, as if his neck had locked up. The most disturbing thing was that he was smiling. Not aggressively, it was a serene, calm smile. Like someone who fully accepts what is about to happen, he slowly turned his head and looked at me. He didn't say anything, but the smile widened. I ran up the stairs, locked the door with all the furniture I could drag, and locked myself in the bathroom. I was breathing too fast. My hands were shaking, my thoughts were jumbled. I looked in the mirror and tried to repeat my name out loud. I couldn't, my mouth opened, but no words came out. Just that feeling that the name no longer belonged to me. I was someone, but I didn't know who. And the part of me that knew was already gone. In the following hours, I heard knocking on the door. It was rhythmic, soft, like the knocking on the window days earlier. And between each knock, a soft voice said, "You're ready now." Let me in. The voice sounded like my sister's. Or maybe my mother's. Or maybe my own, I can't tell, but it was familiar. And that's what scared me the most. I spent the rest of the night in absolute silence, trying not to think, not to hear, not to feel. But even with my eyes closed, I saw flickering images, the red background, the white letters, the repeated message. And when I opened my eyes, I realized I had written on the floor with charcoal from the stove, "Everything's better now." I didn't remember doing that, but the handwriting was mine. Or, at least, it was similar enough. When dawn broke, the sky seemed even more wrong. The light had no defined color, as if the sun was trying to rise, but something was blocking the last part of the morning. Time didn't pass correctly. My wristwatch spun the numbers as if it were in test mode. My cell phone battery had finally died. Even the silence seemed denser. I still had the map in my hands. The signal truck was marked with a circle in the center of Red Pine Falls. In front of the old radio station building, it was far, and the path was exposed. But if I didn't go, I already knew my fate, to become another smiling body staring at the sky. I grabbed the notebook, a flashlight, a knife, and the remaining water bottle. I left through the back laundry room, the same way as before. The streets were empty, but not like an ordinary night. It was a programmed absence. As if someone had emptied the world, so I would have no one to talk to. Halfway there, I saw a child standing on the sidewalk, alone. She was looking at the pavement, hands behind her back, humming something without a melody. When I passed her, she stopped singing. She looked at me and said in a low voice, "You're going there, aren't you?" "They know," and then she went back to singing. I stood paralyzed for a few seconds. I tried to ask who they were, but she just turned and went into the house next door without rushing. I kept walking, and the closer I got to the center of town, the more I felt like I was walking inside a glass corridor. The store windows displayed mannequins facing outwards, all with their faces covered by red cloths. This wasn't normal. This wasn't part of the decor. It had been placed there afterwards, by someone, or by something that wanted to see me pass by. Finally, I reached the spot indicated on the map. The old radio station was locked, but behind it, in the empty lot, was the truck. A military vehicle, gray, without license plates. The windows were dark and the engine was off. Even so, the chassis vibrated, as if some machine inside was still operating. On the side, a LED panel flashed with the same message: "Remain at home. Await instructions." I approached slowly, my eyes fixed on the words. The feeling of being pulled was real. Not physically, but as if my mind wanted to get closer, understand, obey. When I put my hand on the doorknob, I heard a voice behind me, "Don't touch that." I turned and saw a man, leaning against a wall, holding an iron bar. His face was dirty, his gaze tired. He was one of the locals I used to see at the market, but I couldn't remember his name. He approached. "Can you still think?" I nodded, unsure if it was true. "Then we have a chance." His name was Martin. He had been hiding in the city center's service tunnels, trying to track the signal. He told me more people had tried to destroy that truck, but they couldn't even get close. Most gave up halfway, others simply stopped. With his help, we opened the back of the vehicle. Inside, it was worse than I imagined. There was no one, but there were screens. Many screens, and all of them displayed faces. Hundreds of faces of the town's residents, repeating synchronized phrases. Some screens showed house rooms, others showed empty streets. It was as if the truck was watching the entire town, recording every word spoken, every window closed. Martin started destroying the wires with the iron bar while I looked for the generator. The machine trembled, as if trying to resist. When I finally cut the power cables, the screens flickered and began to shut down one by one. The sound of the voices diminished to just a whisper, and then silence. But it wasn't the end. Martin stopped moving. He stood still in the middle of the truck bed, looking at the last screen still on. It was his face, but he was smiling. He fell to the ground shortly after. No scream, no struggle, he just fell. I rushed to him, but he had no pulse. His face still showed that serene smile. For a second, I thought I was smiling too. I put my hand on my face. It was normal, but the thought lingered. I got out of there as fast as I could, running through increasingly distorted streets. The houses seemed tilted, the trees seemed to be watching me. And the feeling of being followed never left me. When I finally reached the edge of the town, I no longer knew if I had managed to escape the signal, or if I was just carrying it with me. I stayed out of town for a while, hidden in an abandoned shed on the outskirts of Red Pine Falls, eating the little I had saved and drinking rainwater. I thought maybe I had won, that the destroyed truck meant the end of the signal, but every night, I heard something. Not outside the shed, inside me, low voices, repeating the same thing. Not like a thought, it was deeper than that. As if my mind had been re-recorded by a program that was still running in the background. During the third day in that shelter, I noticed a red light flashing in the sky. It was a drone. Not a military one, small, commercial. It came from the north, circled my position, and then left. The next day, another appeared. It wasn't a coincidence, they were still monitoring. They were still searching. That's when I understood. The truck wasn't the source. It was just one of the transmitters, like one tower among many. The central hub was still active. And the hub was what fed the voices. I went back. I knew it was a stupid decision, but I needed to know where it was coming from. I walked back through the forest to the west side of town. What I saw paralyzed me. Red Pine Falls wasn't abandoned. On the contrary, it seemed in order. The lights in the houses were all on, the curtains perfectly aligned. Some children were playing on the sidewalk. But the way they moved was too artificial, as if every gesture had been rehearsed. As if every resident was living a perfect simulation of their old life, and everyone was smiling. I found what I was looking for in the old part of town, near the D'Souza train tracks. An emergency operations center had been set up in an old school. Inside, through a broken window, I saw cables, panels, antennas, and a room full of people. They were sitting in chairs, side by side, with headphones and monitors on. Their eyes were open, but unblinking. Some mumbled nonsense words. Others just took a deep breath and repeated, "You're safe now." There were no supervisors, no security. Just them, functioning like pieces of a living machine. I walked among them, none reacted. And in the center of the room, a single screen displayed an aerial view of Red Pine Falls, and at the bottom of the screen, a phrase silently rotated, "Stable connection." Active transmission. I didn't know what to do. Unplug cables, destroy equipment. Part of me just wanted to run. But another part wanted to sit there too. Put on the headphones, be silent, stop feeling, stop being. But I forced myself to leave. On the way back, I saw my own face reflected in a storefront. I was sweaty, pale, but something was wrong. My eyes weren't blinking. And there was a slight smile at the corner of my mouth. The same smile I saw on the mailman, on the delivery guy, on the child. Maybe I had already passed the point of no return. I fled the town that same night, not by road, nor by the known trails. I cut through the dense woods, following only instinct and what was left of my free will. I walked for hours until the sound disappeared. Not the sound of the town, the sound inside my head. I found shelter in an abandoned cabin in the mountains. Since then, I avoid any electronic devices. I use candles, write by hand, eat what I can hunt or grow. I don't connect with anyone. Sometimes I see smoke on the horizon. Sometimes I hear voices that sound human, but I'm not sure. I never go to them. 6 months have passed. The signal is gone, but not the thoughts. I still dream of the phrase. I still wake up with the feeling that I'm smiling, even when I'm not. Sometimes I forget my name for a few minutes. Sometimes I catch myself repeating phrases I didn't write. The world didn't end, but it changed. Red Pine Falls was just a test site, an experiment. Perhaps other places have already been corrected. Perhaps this is the new way to control people. Not with force, but with quiet obedience. A screen, a soft voice, an order that sounds like care. If you saw the alert, even for a second, it might already be too late.